car that I was talking about, that was my deceased brother's car that Renge would sleep in the back in. When I was going to recovery meetings, he'd go, and every night or every morning, any meeting we could go to, he'd be curled up in the back.
Hello again, dog lovers. Welcome back to Rescued by a Dog, the podcast about dogs who have actually saved their owners' lives. I'm Laura, host of this podcast and author of the novel Not Just a Dog. Today's episode is sponsored by izzystays.com, a hotel booking website for dog lovers. Izzy Stays thinks every dog should be as spoiled as yours, so they set up a free and easy way to send the sales commission from your hotel booking to animal welfare charities. Check out Izzy Stays at izzystays.com. While I work hard on editing some amazing stories for season 4 of the podcast, I'm re-releasing some of my favorite stories from past seasons, and today we'll revisit a moving story of loss, heartbreak, and recovery from renowned trainer Matt Beisner. The story of his relationship with his Jindo Renge and how Renge changed him permanently is so beautiful that it'll break your heart and then put it back together again. Now, here's Matt.
If anybody's listening and you're struggling, you're not alone. I don't know where your help is or how it's going to show up, but you're not alone.
Hi, Matt. It's good to talk to you.
Hi, Laura. It's really good to talk with you and be here.
Thank you for coming on this podcast. I am so excited to hear your story. You and I have worked together in a number of ways, both at shelters and on documentaries, and I am thrilled to hear how dogs have helped you. I know how you help dogs.
I think I feel privileged to have the conversation with you in the format of a podcast because growing up afraid of dogs, this wasn't on my bucket list.
Oh my God, you were afraid of dogs growing up?
Yeah, into adulthood. Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, I had loved dogs. And I think that, the way that I understand it now is that the dynamic in our family was like a tire that always had a hole in it, and the dogs were the patch. And they would come and go, but really the memory that stands out to me as a turning point is Halloween. I was young, maybe 6 or 7 years old. It was nighttime. I had a little, pumpkin bucket for candy. Pardon me. And I approached out of the dark a man and his German Shepherd, and the German Shepherd was responding totally appropriately. And all of the adults said it was okay to move forward. And their one go-to was the tail was wagging, which we now know that doesn't necessarily mean what we think it means. So I went forward and I reached for the candy, and the dog lunged. I affectionately call the dog Spooky. Spooky lunged and punctured my right arm. And from that point on, nobody really knew how to help me navigate it. Why the dog had done it, how to deal with the trauma of it. And what I felt that took me, I didn't realize until this year that really what I was left brokenhearted and betrayed. Mm. Dogs were something that I loved, and somehow this had gone terribly wrong. So there wasn't really a way for us to heal it because our family wasn't practiced in healing much. And as time went on, even though I had a dog later on in life, an adopted hound named Barney, rest in peace, who would always run away, and then he'd come back. I'd walk the streets for a hot dog, and he'd come back and grab the hot dog and then run away again. So it took me a while to figure that one out. He was on to me. But really, the fear didn't go away. It actually got worse. And by the time I was well into adulthood, for any number of reasons, I'm a man. I don't tell people I'm afraid of dogs. I cross the street when I see a dog. I go to their house. There's a dog in the house, and I can't stop thinking about the dog. And that's where it was. And then when I found myself, this is quite a segue, but when I found myself in jail, because I in a drunk driving accident, I had hit somebody on a motorcycle. And I want to frame this because my younger brother had died on his motorcycle about 8 months earlier, and I inherited his car. And one night in a blackout, I hit somebody on a motorcycle. Fortunately, the man and his friend who were on the bike are okay. We're okay, but it was that was the last time I drank or did drugs. I've been clean and sober since then, and so at about 2 months sober, somebody wanted me to be their boyfriend. And I said yes. And she said, oh, and by the way, I live with a little terrier and he's aggressive. And I was like, well, I'm going to weigh my chances here. So I moved in with her. It was a hot mess, but it was the beginning of me re-examining my relationship with dogs, because what I understood from watching a TV show was that it was possible for a grown man to get over his fear of dogs. And then somehow a message that I took away, which would take me a decade to clarify, was if I do what's good for the dog, I'm going to change for the better.
Oh.
I'll give you an example of what it looked like. At the time, I'm living off of my then girlfriend. She's got a bungalow. It's me in Kingston. He's got to get out. She's working because I'm living off of her. And he's got to get out and go to the bathroom. So I have to figure out a way to get Kingston out. Now, Kingston, as a 8 or 9 month old terrier would, has big feelings about being outside and things that move, et cetera, including whatever backstory he had that allowed him to survive living on the streets. So when I got outside to sit on the front porch with Kingston and just watch, it was probably one of the first times that I had paused in years. And one of the profound and easily overlooked experiences that is necessary for a dog is processing. And one of the things I was probably most in need of and least capable of was processing. And so Kingston slowed my world down. And we'd go out and we got to know the world together. You know, the walks were a hot mess. And I was copying stuff I saw on TV, and I didn't know nothing from nothing. And I was out there. And if it weren't for Kingston, I wouldn't have gotten out of bed that day.
What was it like to be in your heart and in your mind at that time? What was going on with you emotionally?
It's a beautiful and incisive question. What it was like to be me at that time, I was probably more or less 2 years sober. I wanted to die every day. I was trying to function in my sobriety the way I had functioned in my life up to that point, which was really on my own, but grifting what I could from everybody else. And so my state of mind was, I was all over the place. I was relatively unemployable. I think I was making $11 a day as an adult delivery boy. So to any of your listeners, I'm not a model for the state of mind that one should be in when one goes to adopt a dog.
I don't know. I might beg to differ, because like you said, when someone feels like I got to get a dog today, it's because they know their heart can give what's needed and can accept what the dog's able to give.
Yeah, you're right. And I will say to counter that, it's become clear to me that nothing is wasted. Nothing I've done with any of my dogs, or frankly, in any of my life, is wasted if I'm willing to use it to help somebody else.
Yes. Because
then one less dog feels alone or unseen or unmet. One less person feels unheard. And that's how we get back together. My girlfriend and her daughter, whom I'm living with, they came home and said, we saw a dog, and we already had Kingston the Terrier. And I said, we are not getting another dog until I make more money or the Yankees win the World Series. and neither of those things happened. But I had begun a regular meditation practice, and I remember being on my mat, and I remember hearing in a meditation, go see this dog. And I did that thing that we do as dog people. I just went to the shelter. And if you'd asked me what I was doing there, I probably couldn't have even given you a straight answer, because I don't know why I was aware.
Yep. Yeah, how many dog people have accidentally ended up with a dog one day?
Somewhere like dogs they're in collusion with Mother Nature as a whole, and they're just going to send out this beam,
Yep.
Beam that says, somebody right now listening to this is like, I just heard it. That's my message. I got to go get a dog.
Yes.
So that leads me to my Jindo Renge. And if any of your listeners don't know Jindos, check them out. Their stories, that the history of Jindos is amazing. They are, I'm biased, of course, but I would say they're one of the most noble, dignified, elegant, intelligent, sensitive, composed dogs out there. And I went to the shelter and I saw all the other dogs were, doing what they do when you walk through the shelter. And then down at the end, I come across this Jindo, and he's up at the front of the gate and he's just leaning against the wall of his kennel. He's one of the most beautiful beings I've ever seen. But more importantly, if nobility had a look, it would be Renge. He's like lighter than blonde. He's mostly whitish, but his two two softest ears in the history of dog ears are, they're these erect and sharp triangles that are just kind of like almost a coffee with too much cream in it color. and he's just, and proportionally, if people aren't familiar, Jindos come from the Spitz family line. So that would be Shiba Inus, Akitas. So, you can get a visual of how they look. And he was about 47 pounds, give or take. And just, there he is in the shelter. I'm about to learn in my conversation with the lead volunteer there that he's been adopted and returned. He's 4 years old. They don't know his history, but he bites. So I asked the volunteer, could I meet him? And she said, oh yeah, absolutely. Huge shout out to Charla. I don't know if she's a wizard at West LA Animal Shelter. And she said, absolutely. And so she brings him out on a slip lead and brings him to the little meet and greet yard. And he goes at that slip lead, like leash climbing up that thing. It's like, it's biblical. It's gnashing of teeth and gums and, bleeding and the whole thing. Leash climbing is a common reaction to a high level of arousal or stress that a dog has. And what triggers that level of arousal, it could just be I'm coming out of my kennel and I have big feelings about, walking past other dogs, or it could be, I don't want a leash on me. One thing I can tell you about Jindos and about the natural dog category that they fall in is that they do not do well with containment or confinement. And it's not just, I don't want to be in a crate or I don't want to be on a leash. I don't want to be in the yard. I don't want to be where something is closed off and I don't have access to it. So he leash climbs up this thing. And this handler, that was really my first insight in person to watching a handler with skills. And she's so deft. She's tiny. She can't be more than 5 feet tall and 90 pounds. And she's handling this dog calmly and quietly. And then I stay seated, and then she just stays in there with me and drops the leash. He comes to sniff me. I'm pretty sure she did, don't touch him, but I didn't, I wouldn't have anyway. And then she brings him back in. And I go home and I don't tell my girlfriend and her daughter, whom I'm living with, that I went to see a dog. And I'm in another meditation a few days later, and it comes to me again. Go get this dog. He will save your life someday. And I go to the shelter and I ask to see him again. And Charla says, I don't know why he is still here. I don't know why we still have him here. He's the kind of dog that normally doesn't last this long. And the volunteer brings him out and brings him into the big play yard. And Jindos don't read the way other dogs do. Their comportment is different.
Like, you can't tell what their body language means? Is that what you're saying? Correct.
You're not going to see really overt signs, from a Jindo in a way that you would, like my pitties, they're very expressive, So with dogs like Jindos, it's easy to miss stuff. I thought of him as a wolf. He just felt as wolf to me as anything that I'd experienced. And then I met and got to work with some wolves. And I thought, yeah, there's some carryover there. So I toss a ball because dogs like to play fetch, right? And he runs to get the ball, and I go to take the ball from him. And he threatens to bite me. Whoa, okay, I won't do that. And by the way, that behavior right there, that's gonna last for like the next 10 years. I didn't even know that.
Right.
So I'm in a place that, in early sobriety where I am willing to trust a quieter voice that's not mine. And I don't know, I pitched it to my then girlfriend and her daughter, but I bring him home and then all hell breaks loose. He's not meant to be confined. He repeatedly attacks and punctures Kingston. I have no idea what I'm doing. And it's just a mess. And when he's out in the backyard, he chews through the gate and goes running through the neighborhood on a path of destruction. And I discover the only way I can catch him is to be on my bike and find him pooping in somebody's yard. And like that 30-second window where he's pooping, that's where I can get a leash on him. Kingston would run with him, even though they would fight each other. I mean, amazingly, they'd become the best of friends. And we must have had collars on them because people kept being able to find us, or I was out walking them enough where people might recognize, He goes under the bed with my socks. I reach under. I think it's okay to say like a dum-dum. And he growls. This is a pro tip. Do not punish the growl. If you take away that growl, that dog's going to stop growling. You'll be on a fast road to being bit. So he would growl. And then I just got into that really dangerous ego trip. F you, F me. I'm going to take this effing sock. And he was like, okay, I'm going to bite you to make pressure go away. And Dr. Dunbar's bite scale, 1 through 6, 6 being death, 5 being multiple deep puncture grab and hold attacks, 4 being a singular grab and hold puncture attack. Renge was a bite level 5. And in hindsight, I understood the body language. He didn't feel good going into that. I provoked him. He bit me. He didn't feel good afterwards. Yeah. The sorry that people often refer to, my dog seems really upset about it. My dog seems really sorry. It's actually more, and I'm not saying that these are sentient beings, so I'm not saying that there's not remorse, not for me to say, but the arc behaviorally is I'm stressed up to a point. Now I'm over my threshold, I bite, and the continuum of the stress looks like I'm dazed or stunned or sorry or remorseful.
What was it in you that made you say, I'm not going to give up on this dog?
Such a great question, Laura. So if I go back to being on my meditation mat and believing that I am hearing, you have to get this dog, he'll save your life someday. My willingness to listen to a quiet voice that wasn't mine was the only thing that was going to keep me alive. I was suicidal well into sobriety. And I had to be willing to listen to something that didn't seem to be my noise. Yeah. And so that's the thing that I was hanging on, because I was told by whoever the God or gods are, I was told that this dog will save my life someday.
So it was purely about you, or was it about him too? Was it about both, the sticking with him?
It was definitely about both. Yeah. So I was so deeply invested in this dog. I loved this dog in these years. I didn't recognize at that time how much I loved him. But man, I thought like that was like, if you'd asked me then, that was my dog. We were riding our bike one evening. Common mistake, and this woman had opened her front door. Her dog was in the back, and the dog bolted out of the front door and came after us. And I'm on my bike, and I've got Renge on the harness and with a leash going to the frame, and I've got an additional leash on my hand. And Renge, Renge fights that dog off that is chasing us on the bike. The dog lets us go, and then we just carry on. And I was like, did you just fight off a dog on a harness on a bike ride?
Without making a fall?
Without making us fall? Right? So those were the early days. And then my girlfriend and I at that time, we split up. She took Kingston with her, and I took Renge with me. And I was probably a little bit more than a couple years sober. I was still relatively unemployable. And that car of mine that I had inherited from my brother, that I had hit the motorcycle driver with my last night drinking, I couldn't leave Renge at home, and I couldn't leave him in a crate. And when I finally got a job working at an organic produce store in Santa Monica, shout out to the co-op for giving a bum like me a job. When it was weather appropriate, I would bring Renge with me in the car, and he'd sit in the back seat. And on my lunch break or my 15-minute breaks, I'd go check on him, and we'd have a little time. And that's how we managed for a long time.
He must have been pretty mad about being in that car.
You know what was amazing about that? You would think it was like he knew. I'm totally putting that on him, but that doesn't mean it's not true. I would come back to the car and he would be curled up. Never did damage to the car. Right around this time, I'm probably 3 years sober, so it's about 12 years ago. I'm working at the co-op. I have to get out of the house that my girlfriend and I shared. And I'm looking for a place, and I can't find anything. And one day a guy shows up and he says, I heard you're looking for a place to live. He just kind of got to talk to everybody. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I might have a couple places for you. So he says to me, all right, I already got somebody who's going to take the place that I have in mind for you, but I'm going to give it to you because you're the kind of guy who doesn't give up his dog to move. And I want to say to the listeners, I am not anti-rehoming. I'm not passing judgment there, because I facilitate a lot of those conversations, because this is about quality of life for everybody involved. But that man, Peter, changed my life because he gave me and Renge a shot. And I moved into, gosh, you can't even call it a studio. It was literally one room with a closet, a bathtub, and I had a boilerplate that I would cook on, and I would do my dishes in the bathtub. And somehow I started dating somebody, and she would come over, my now wife Brooklyn, and she would come over, and we would have meals on the one floor that had space. And I would try to hide the dishes in the bathroom so that she wouldn't look. And I later learned that she did look, and she wondered why a grown-ass man had dishes in his bathtub. Clinical separation anxiety, which one might say that Renge had, is a series of panic disorders that usually kick up in the first 30 minutes of the dog being left alone. So this is not the same thing as FOMO, where Laura's left the house, but Laura's husband is still there and the dog is bugging out. So for Renge, there on my part was a confusion about him having separation anxiety because he was doing so much destruction when I was leaving. But it turned out to not be the case, because you cannot treat, as we know it now, you can't treat separation anxiety in any other approach than desensitization. It doesn't work with, I'm going to give you an awesome bone and you're going to leave, because if I have a panic disorder, it doesn't matter the gift that you just gave me, right? And there are fantastic experts that focus solely on separation anxiety. But in time, we acclimated. I applied some things, and there was a normality to it. And I was working at that co-op, and I was up at 4 a.m, and it was. I soon would realize that it was some of the best moments of my life. It was the first time I had ever lived alone. I'd get up every morning at 4 a.m. I would light a candle. My mind was too busy to meditate, but I was told I couldn't continue my meditation process, but somebody said, light a candle and look at the flame for 1 minute. And I would do that. And then Renge and I, because it was pitch black out, I'd put the harness on him and I'd get on my bike, and we would run for like 2 miles around the dark streets of LA, and then come back and I'd feed him breakfast. And As far as I could tell, he would crash out. And that was our process for a while. So we're building something. I am building a relationship with Brooklyn, and we decide to move in together. But before we do that, I have an experience at a stop sign. I'm walking Renge down the street. Again, I had no right to call myself a trainer, but that apparently has never stopped anybody. And I had him on a choke chain, and I'm not going to get into methods, and that those are not here to offend or promote anything. I know how I work, and I'm certified, and humane is my primary focus and things like that. So I'm just talking about who I was and where I was at the time. So I had him on a choke chain. We were on a walk. I stopped at a stop sign, and I asked him to sit. Now the reality is we didn't need to sit. He didn't need to sit. He had already stopped. And nowadays when people come to me and they say, my dog won't sit, my first question is, well, why do you want the dog to sit? And it's actually not the sit that we want. It's the pause or the attention, right? So let's stop trying to make the dog do something, and let's actually capitalize on what the dog's inclined to do. So it's just really shifted my training. I popped this collar, and he just looks at me. And I've known him long enough now to say, he was looking at me like, why would you do that? You don't need to do that, And I popped it again, and this woman pulls up at the stop sign, and she rolls down her window, and just like a godsend, this woman says, "That looks like that hurts." And she says it with the kind of insight and consideration that makes it possible for me to never forget it. And any of us that live with dogs, we practice behavior. Any of us that train, we practice behavior. It takes time to unlearn things. It would take me time to unlearn some of that. But what I recognize is that I was embarrassed about the possibility that this total stranger thought that my dog didn't respect me.
Oh.
Right? Rather than being embarrassed about the fact that I'm treating my dog poorly because I need respect, because at my heart, I actually feel unrespectable.
Did you recognize that in that moment?
I recognized like half of it, which is great, but a really uncomfortable place to be. Like, oh my God, I'm doing something that's not right by this dog, and I'm not sure how to change it. So that was one of that was really one of the more impactful immediate experiences in my life with Renge. And then a second one was I'm walking him one day in that same neighborhood, and I'm practicing being looser on the leash, and I'm walking him, and we come up against this beautiful effervescent pit bull who's at a local body shop. And she's always at the fence wagging and wagging. And I'm walking by with Renge, and I thought, I'll go for like a nose-to-nose meeting at the fence. He's just gentle with her and kind. And all of a sudden I realized, God, Renge might be able to live with another dog. So that leads us to another amazing story about our dog Nama, and Nama became Renge's first new friend since Kingston wasn't living with us anymore. Nama is, let's see, so if the landlords are listening, Nama is a Labrador mix.
There we go.
Yeah. So I start to see a side of Renge in my personal practice of bracing against life rather than embracing for life. I am prepared for the worst, because that's kind of what happens. You grow up with trauma, you brace yourself. I mean, that's what happens. So Renge and Nama and I and my wife, Brooklyn, we managed to find a way to live together. We actually managed to move in together.
Tell me you weren't still in that tiny room with the bathtub in the living room.
No, I knew I had to make a change when my girlfriend, who I was falling in love with, wouldn't come stay the night with me. Yep. You can't be in the falling in love stage and not be sleeping together, generally speaking.
Right.
This is the beginning of my life being saved, what I'm about to share now. And to think about it, and different people will have different experiences of what a saved life is. But I can tell you the seminal moments in my life that were a direct result of Renge being there. For example, the car that I was talking about, that was my deceased brother's car that Renge would sleep in the back in. When I was going to recovery meetings, he'd go, and every night or every morning, any meeting we could go to, he'd be curled up in the back.
Mm.
You know, he's gone to thousands of meetings with me over the years. You know, I was going to say he was the one person. He was the one being I could trust at a time in my life where I was untrustworthy and could trust no one. And, you know, as any of us can attest to, the challenge of finding beauty is that you can't help but open your heart. And that is not easy. Living an open-hearted life is not for the weak. It is for the vulnerable. And vulnerability requires a strength that most of us don't think we have. One day I'm on a walk with Renge. I think at this point we have Pierre, Renge, Kingston has come back to us. We have Nama, and we have the beautiful mystical Deja Blue, Blue Nose Pity mixed with the Blue Lacy. Shout out to Blue Lacy's, who are the state dog of Texas. So I'm walking with Renge, and we're taking our usual route in our neighborhood. Like a lot of neighborhoods in LA, loose dogs, particular kind of culture around it. And this enthusiastic pit puppy busts out of his backyard gate and comes running at us. And in hindsight, I don't think he had any intention other than, can I say hi? Can I say hi? Can I say hi? You know, but pits come on strong, and Renge wasn't really that. He wasn't the kind of dog you did that to. And they went nose to nose, and I don't know if I caused this, but I know that my reaction to it didn't help. I tightened on the leash, I pulled back, and I yelled, and Renge popped. And he went right at that dog. And they got into it, and I put my hand in the middle of it, and he bit me. Renge bit me. The pity gets taken care of. I actually went to them, I think the next couple of days, went to the family and said, at this point I had started taking my training more seriously. And I said, can I help you with the pity? You know, no harm. Can I help you with it? But that bite, that night on my right hand, right where the base of the thumb meets the wrist, I wasn't really much on self-care, and I didn't treat the wound. And I woke up the next morning, and there was a red line, like 2/3 of the way up my arm, and I was in a lot of pain. And Brooklyn took me to the ER, and the doctor said, "You're a couple hours from being dead." So the doctor says to me, while I'm in her care, only good will come from this. And I've been in recovery long enough to, I hear sayings or slogans or things like that. I've never heard that one. I thought, well, that doesn't seem like a professional diagnosis.
Yeah, what a strange thing to hear in a hospital.
Right? And, another angel in my life. And I said, I don't know what you mean by that. She said, only good will come from this. And again, like the woman at the stop sign, she planted that seed in my head. She met me right where I was at. And I thought, okay, I'm going to stay open to the possibility that only good will come from this. And so what happened as a direct result of that bite is that I could no longer work at the co-op. And I was on disability for 6 months, and I had to rest and heal and learn. And that was the beginning of what would become the Zen Dog. The Zen Dog is a company that my wife and I started 11 or 12 years ago as a place for dogs to train, play, socialize, and stay. And by place, I mean in our own home, because I've cleared out all the furniture and moved 22 crates in. And my mom says, your girlfriend's not going to marry you. Be very careful, And the Zen Dog, actually, I'm not the Zen dog. I describe myself as the curator of the Zen dog. The Zen dog is predicated on one principle: there are no bad dogs. There are no bad dogs. And when I would later learn in my education that roughly 90% of aggression is fear-based, that sat right in the wheelhouse. Because if I talk about how it is to be a human being, a scared human being, and I think about what lands me in fights or in jail, I'm scared. And if I can see the dog as potentially scared, if I can see Renge as potentially scared, I have immediate emotional access to who this dog might be. So that bite that forced me to slow my roll, that forced me to reflect, was the beginning of an experience and a company that would change my life. I began to study. I began to study from educated, reputable trainers: Nicole Wilde, Dr. Ian Dunbar, Ken McCourt. Just like I'd go to seminars, I'd watch videos, I'd start to pick stuff up. I was still in that stage where I'm unlearning things and I'm learning things. But the fundamental principle was there are no bad dogs. And so I have to approach dogs from a certain place with that in mind. And that consideration began the arc of changing the trajectory of how I would work. We were doing a lot of socialization in our yard. And like a lot of early trainers, I was, kind of doing cowboy work, and meaning that I wasn't following a lot of safe setups. And then one day, this will sound obvious to a lot of people, but one day it occurred to me, why don't I just start doing some muzzle acclimation and get different, safer looks at what's happening? And something clicked, and all of a sudden, Renge would be in a yard with 15 other dogs, laying in the middle of the yard, not fighting, not feeling the need to behave from a place of reactivity and overstimulation because I've set him up to fail. You know what I mean? He's now demonstrating, like, this dog scared me more than any dog, Renge. I had been bit by Renge like a dozen times.
So I'm so fascinated that you skipped over these dozen bites.
Yeah.
Because that's all, like, what I'm seeing when you're telling this story is this huge, like, cosmic worldview shift that you had, where you went from wanting to die every day, and thinking you needed to leash pop a dog with a prong collar on, to being the person that I know to be one of the most sensitive and kind and gentle trainers that I've met, and with these incredible body language skills. And so there's a couple pieces that are still missing in there, which is, you were afraid of him. You've just said that he bit you a dozen times. So it's almost like you don't want to mention that because you don't want to, like, sully his reputation or something.
No.
But
I think what you're keying in on, I really appreciate you digging at this. What you're keying in on is that trauma had been normalized in my life. And so it's all relative. So the very simple solution with a Jindo or not is, if you have a dog that takes your socks and goes under the bed and resource guards socks, don't leave your socks on the floor. That's a start.
Yeah.
Right? That must have been confounding to Renge. And there's a really important point to be brought back around. It is traumatizing for a dog to bite.
Yeah.
So like, this is my PSA. So it's not okay. It's not cool. We don't let it ride. It's not part of a demonstration of how brave I am. It really is a demonstration of my lack of understanding. Not for lack of love, but my lack of understanding. So I think that the glossing over it, I don't know what that's about, but I do know that but trauma had been normalized and violence had long been normalized. And Renge, he's so astute. He's so keen. And he's just such a remarkable being that, of course, he would be tutoring me. But he's demonstrating a change in behavior as a result of my willingness to set him and everybody else up better. We had like this bizarrely huge, it seemed like a casting couch. And by the time we're living in this place in the same neighborhood where Renge bit me when I tried to break up the fight, and we were boarding at our place, we would have 9 dogs on that couch. And Renge, being Renge, would always lay on his mat on the floor in the center of the room, adjacent to me. That's how he ruled. And so he held space, and he held the room. And when we opened our facility, I saw the same thing. He'd be in the middle of the yard, bunch of dogs running around, and he would just be there like a lion, like he knew his place. Yeah. The other thing that stands out to me about Renge is he was so goofy. Wouldn't put those two things together, but I've got a photo of him where we were all meditating and Renge's upside down on his back on a yoga mat doing Renge spazoid stuff, not understanding that we're supposed to be, holy and serene because we're meditating. He said, "This is a great time. Everybody's quiet. Great time for me to do my stretches," And the other thing, going back to the softest ears in the world of dogs, he was really tender. He was really tender and kind. And by the time my son was 4.5 and got to meet him, I mean, we spent a lot of time together. Bless my son for listening to me. Thank you to my mentors for helping me raise my son that way. And Renge, I said to Talon, that's my son's name, "Talon, you want to meet Renge today?" Talon was so excited, and Renge came out into the living room where we were. Talon stayed next to me, and Renge just came and kind of brushed along him, which sometimes is not a great move with a dog with an aggression history. But I knew Renge well enough to know that it was an invitation, and Talon gave him one gentle pet in the middle of the back, and then Renge laid down and gave him his belly. Oh. Right? And if you get Renge's belly, you are in a circle. And Renge lay there, and Talon pet his belly, and then Renge gets up, sneezes, which was always his cue for "we're good, I'm done." Can be a pretty common stress cue. And he gets up, and from that moment on, I could leave them alone together. And what's fascinating is what that changed for Renge was that when our daughter Lyric came along, he was immediately gentle with her and kind with her. And as time went on, I just wanted to be like him. Like he was, to me, he was the model. If only I could be that dignified and noble and protective of those I love, and clear and gentle and funny and kind. And as magnificent as he was unassuming. People would come into a yard and they'd see all the other hullabaloo, and then they'd notice, "What's that dog doing in the middle of the yard? Oh my God, he's just watching like a lion." And so as I have this privilege to have an opportunity to have a TV show, Dog Impossible, which is we've got both seasons on Disney Plus. And I'd like to say, I got a TV show, but I think the reality is a TV show got me because one never knows what one's getting into. Yeah. For people who don't know how a reality show, or let's say a dog training reality show, gets made, as a participant and one of the associate producers of the show by way of, how I had to run things, I would get a look at each episode and submit notes on the episode to the executive producer, and then I would never see the episode again until or the season until the rest of the world watched it with me. And I saw things that I didn't like and what I had done. Some things were things that I hadn't done in years, but but I was in a moment of overwhelm. I wasn't thinking straight, and other things were things that I had practiced. And it just and I thought, oh, I'm not even going to try and defend, pretend, or explain. I need better. I need to show up better. And thankfully we got a second season. And when the second season came around, I was committed to being a certified trainer and to bring new understandings and education and methods. And also I was stepping into a role that I'm now really grateful for and comfortable with. And that is that I am one of the few people, who has survived cancel culture, because there was an understandable backlash after season 1. But I'm one of the few people who actually gets to grow publicly. But I relied on Renge's presence. I needed him to tell me what was and wasn't okay in the yard and with the dog that we were working with. And I relied on his eyes and ears and sense and sensitivity. And if I can just have enough courage to be open-hearted, to tolerate the profound beauty of seeing that, and I might have the privilege of seeing it again and someday calling it a relationship. So COVID hits, and then we found ourselves in a very unusual place because I could see Renge's behavior changing. He was slower. He was still gentle and kind and fierce and not to be effed with. But I could just see he was sleeping more. And we made the choice. And in the last 3 days before we helped him pass, the downshift was remarkable. And 3 days out, I remember coming into my office and he was laying in the office on the middle of my carpeted floor. Just so beautiful and peaceful and noble. And I thought, I got to go lay down next to him. Now he wasn't really into that. It wasn't his thing. And I went to lay down next to him. And he kind of woke up from his slumber and he scooched himself toward me. He had never done. And I laid there with him for a while. And then we helped him pass. And I knew that dog, that guardian angel, had changed the world because he had changed me. And he not only saved my life, he saved the lives, at this point, thousands of dogs.
Did you ever get to a place where he didn't bite you?
Yeah, it was actually fascinating. We were still in California, so when he passed, he was almost 17. Not bad for a dog who was adopted at 4.5 years old from who knows where. Yeah, there was a moment, he was about 15 years old and we were in Glendale, California, in the LA area. And he had caught a bird or a mouse. He caught a rodent. He still had it in him. And I went outside. I knew I was going to have to clean it up, but I was also trying to help him not get sick, at least from a GI standpoint. And I went over to him and I asked him to drop this creature. I forget what it was, but the rodent that he had caught, and he dropped it. I was like, oh my God. You know, it wasn't, I kind of like given up the ghost from a training standpoint. I just thought, it's not a big deal to me. We can live with it. I probably could have done knowing what I know now, I could have done plenty of resource guarding work and then taken the risk out of it, or minimized the risk greatly. But he dropped it. And like from that point on, we found a ball that the neighbor had thrown in the yard. Hey, Rennie, can you drop that? Drop it. Reluctantly, but he would drop it. I can't speak for him. I don't mean to be self-deprecating when I say that he was a much better being than I was. But when he passed, my mom sent me a card and she said, you saw the magnificent in him and he saw that in you. I think she was right about that. And we were the definition of ride or die,
Yeah.
And part of the challenge, even in the years where I was still battling with suicidal ideation, which again, the listeners, I didn't do alone. I didn't, I'm not here because I treated anything alone. I got help from the right places and the right people. But even then, I remember having thoughts, if I were to take my own life, who's going to take care of Renge?
Yeah. Was there a time that you can recall thinking to yourself, I don't want to die anymore?
Yeah. I remember talking to a buddy of mine once saying, there's this thought that keeps popping up involuntarily in the day. This thought goes into my head. And then Matt did the thing that would forever change his life for the worse. That was literally what kept coming up in my head. And I told this man, and he said, well, maybe next time that comes up, just try saying, and then Matt did the thing that would change his life for the better. And I'm not just about slogans. I'm really got to be about action and service, but that one really stuck with me. Being in life is not easy. Participating, contributing to life. One of the things that Renge really made clear is that what I want most is to love and be loved. This is what I saw in him. What I want most is to love and be loved. And what I am most afraid of is to love and be loved. And my greatest weapons are to withhold love or deny you the chance to love me. My greatest gifts are to love and be loved.
How did he tell you that he loved you? How did he show you?
Usually I can still, somehow his breath was good almost up until he died. It must just have been that must be a thing that I haven't been kissed by too many Jindos, but I'm just going to attribute that to the unique, exquisite, unique nature of Jindos. But he was so soft, I'd come in close and I'd scratch his ears and I'd get my face next to his. He'd duck his head a little bit and he'd just give me some kisses on the lips, just really soft. And then I'd open my palm and I'd rub it on his open ear, and he would just lean in. He would lean into that. And you know what's amazing? I just remembered about that kind of moment. Right before he died, our little daughter Lyric, who at the time was probably 2.5, she came into my office where he was. They had the kind of relationship where she could come and go and they could interact together. And I had turned my back, and then I turned to look back around, and she was rubbing him right in the same place, right on the jowl, around the ear. And he just had his head pressed. I took a photo of it, had his head pressed so hard into her hand, but gently enough that it didn't knock it over, because he loved hard. People are dying for connection. Dogs are dying for connection. The last 2 years, it's been really hard for people and their animals. And connection shows up in a number of ways. But the predictor to connection is consideration. And what I like about consideration for somebody who grew up beaten and hard-hearted is that it's not the same thing as somebody telling me to be kind. I didn't know how to access that. But consideration is just a thought. What's the thing that I don't know here, the knowing of which would change things for the better? Are you happy to be alive now? Oh my God. That's a powerful question. I am so grateful. I used to hear my mentors say, I almost missed this. I was one drink or one accident or one drug away from missing this entire thing. And I am inexplicably privileged. I think beyond happiness, because sometimes even that can be uncomfortable, I am just so deeply grateful that I'm able to experience joy and happiness and life and participation and connection.
If Renge could understand human English, what would you say to him?
Probably the same thing I said to him thousands of times. Most honorable Jindo, thank you for letting me be your friend. And that ER doctor was right. Only good has come from this.